Today, I welcome April Moss, the CEO and co-founder of DigiBuild, a construction software company that streamlines and removes approximately 30% of administrative burden and costs associated with procuring materials. She's a 20-plus year executive, building and running global sales teams for Procter Gamble, Starbucks, and $1 billion sales and marketing broker. Her last position at Procter Gamble was running North America operations for their second largest customer team. Earlier on in her career, she worked at Construction Specification Institute and was a realtor for one of the largest U.S. brokerage firms. Now, April's real passion for DigiBuild is to create a healthier and happier industry in construction. This passion is driven by her personal story about her father, who was a custom cabinet maker and finisher. He loved what he did and was good at it. However, the high-pressure environment, the seasonality, getting paid or not getting paid, loneliness, and the drink culture within construction was a main contributor to her father taking his own life when April was 9 years old. Most don't know that the suicide rate in construction is nearly 4 times greater than the national average and 5 times greater than that of all other construction fatalities combined. So helping the construction projects and construction people is a personal mission for April. So April, very excited to have you on today's episode. Now, we had a little chat before this episode and really got to know each other. And there's so many alignments in our lives. Like my husband's a cabinet maker, for instance. But I would love for you to share more about your journey, right? Because we talked a lot about, hey, the people that have influenced you, what you did from how do you go from Procter and Gamble to owning your own business? So please, the stage is yours.
Well, I appreciate it. And thanks for having me on. And it was a great conversation before the podcast. And I think we could have talked for another couple of hours. So hopefully this will just be the beginning of our journey together. I love what you're doing in the space that you're in. And I think the value that you're bringing to young ladies and women is fantastic and really needed. So I want to thank you, first of all, for getting in that space. And we connected on many levels on talking about Myers-Briggs and talking about emotional intelligence and, strength finders and all those things that help us along the way. But the first area where I'd like to just start is a little bit more about in my background. I mean, it is a pretty dramatic story with my dad and what he went through and construction, I'm working now for a DigiBuild software where we actually do all the bidding, order tracking, and procurement of materials for construction companies. We're one of the few out there in the industry. I think there might be 1 or 2 others, but nobody's really doing what we're doing. We've had some great leaders within this industry to try to digitize construction, Procore and Autodesk being one, CMIC. So there's other ones out there, but this is kind of like the oldest and yet the furthest away from being digitized and coming into the 20th century and really trying to use technology to create better lives for everybody in the industry. And not only that, better margins. I think the bottom line, right? It's always about the bottom line. And so, to make that jump from working, in with Procter and Gamble for 21 years, Starbucks, and all these other large CPG companies, to make that leap and to come over to construction and work there, for most looking from the outside would say, well, that's a really big leap, to go from one industry to another. And, to be honest, I wanted to see if, hey, could I take all these skills that I've learned all these years in this other industry and are they applicable into a totally different new industry? And I would say absolutely yes, especially if you have a desire to learn and you're a lifelong learner. So I think it really does start with yourself. So just a little bit more of my background of what drives me and how I could make that shift, just for people's understanding, is that I had a lot of very strong women in my life that were great examples. And probably top of that list is always your mother, right? And my mom, after my father died, she remarried. You have 6 children that you're trying to manage. She had gone to college, I think, for about 2 years before she married my father and before all this happened. And she was married to him, I think it was close to probably 10 years. And so, when you're younger and you lose your father and you have this great relationship as a father and a daughter and your children, it's very difficult. So suicide in construction is a passion for me because of that losing a father to suicide has a stigma attached to it. But also just losing a father and losing your way along life, not having his influence and that ability to help you think through things. Your mother can do so much, but your father actually contributes a lot as well to your personal relationships and growth. And so it's not a one and done thing. It's affected me and all my siblings our entire life. And so I feel like when I think about that level of suicides, you're not just leaving. It's tragic that, the father committed suicide. And it is other women committing suicide also, but mostly men within construction. It's a life, they're impacting people's lives. It's just like anybody in the military that loses their spouse. You look at, Tunnel for Towers, people that lost their family members, on 9/11, right? Anytime there's a loss there's a lifetime. I don't say imprisonment, but really a lot to overcome, a lot more than you normally would have to. So that's why we, even in our mission statement, that we are trying to create a healthier, happier industry because we feel we can do better. And so that's what I'm really excited about, and why I have passion for DigiBuild and all that. So my grandmother was absolutely amazing. She passed away several years ago, but she leaves behind a legacy of, I think it's close to 300 grandchildren and great grandchildren. So when I say I have a large family, I come from a very large family, lots of cousins. In fact, some of my cousins have worked for me and I still do business with my brother. So it's like we're on our own little community and network of people that you can tap into. But she was a very strong person who loved people. Her and my grandfather had a bunch of cabins that they would rent out. And, obviously during the winter and summer times, we lived up north in Michigan. And so on the Great Lakes. And so you'd have people come up in the winter for hunting and sports. And then in the summertime, you'd have people come around for just being on the beach and sailing and doing all those great things. So, but owning that own business and having to run it and take care of all the cabins and raise 8 children is a lot. So she had a lot of grit that I learned from, but also her passion for people and desire to influence other people and help them along the way. And that became something natural because of all the people that would come up and come to their cabins. And when people are on vacation and getting in the way, they come and decompress and they bring all those things in life with them, right? So I'm pretty sure that's one way that she learned how to communicate and how she learned to identify with people. She also was a lifelong learner. She never had graduated from high school when she was younger. And so she actually went back to high school in her late 60s and graduated with a 4.0. She even took auto mechanics because her son, my uncle, had a shop himself. He ran a auto store, sold cars, but had a mechanic shop as well. So she wanted to understand exactly what he was doing and how his business ran. And so she decided she was going to take auto mechanics. She's just really inspiring person. And then obviously her children were inspired by her. So my mom, true grit, she really helped me understand who I am and gave me that confidence that you really can do pretty much most of anything you'd like to in life if you just continue to, learn, if you continue to, have hard work ethic and really stick to it. I have an aunt who recently passed away, my Aunt Helen, and she had her own little country store, and then it had like a deli and then a butcher shop there. And she actually was one of the first women in Michigan to ever be the first female butcher. So that's kind of exciting. But she'd send home her green bar paper to us, dating back when we'd have these big, huge pieces of paper. Nobody of my siblings really wanted it except to draw or color on it. But I immediately would take those and set up my own cafe out on our back porch and made the most delicious hamburger mud pies, patties, and just would pretend like I was running that business. So I really, really got a lot of passion for business from watching my aunt and how she interacted with people and ran her shop. And I'd go out there and spend lots of weekends and times with my cousin and had to really see that firsthand. So she really inspired me for business. I've got another, my Aunt Doris, and she passed away again several years ago, but she was just the most classy person that I knew, just how she presented herself, how she came across, her high expectations for her children, her sons, as well as her daughters, and just the love for life and stick-to-itiveness. She really impacted me in that way. And that was just really inspiring. And then my other aunt, my mom's other sister, she's probably one of my closest friends. And she's like that homesteader, true grit, resourceful person who's very involved in community and loves people. And so all these women around me, I feel very privileged and honored to have had impact my life, and all that flows through me and into what I do today. So it's very important.
It's so interesting because I coach a lot on influence with my one-on-one clients. And so I want to ask a follow-up question to that, because all of those qualities and those women that have influenced you, like how did that show up for you in your corporate journey, actually? And now where you are now, like, because there's qualities, there's specific things that the reason why we admire those people is because those qualities are within ourselves, right? And we start to exude those. So tell us a little bit about your corporate life and that grit and that, continuous learning and all of those influential things and qualities that you talked about. How did that show up for you?
So if you were to be hired by Procter Gamble, I mean, you usually had to have graduated from a top 10 Ivy League school, Wharton, Harvard, just come to mind, Yale. And then you spend an entire week if you were applying for a position, you would spend an entire week or a weekend, depends on what program they were at, with your competition for that role. And they would be, kind of doing through this testing, asking lots of questions, kind of putting you through, pretty in-depth kind of interview that most companies wouldn't do. And that's why Procter Gamble is so good. They're amazing, absolutely amazing company to work for. And the things I've learned from them are tremendous. But coming from a very poor family, my dad turned a barn into a house. I was raised in a small little cottage with 2 bedrooms and 6 people and 1 bathroom. Figure those statistics out. Who's going to take a shower when and get into the restroom when needed, right? So just very practical stuff, that I grew up with. So I think the leadership that the women that impacted me in my life and their stick-to-itiveness and really taking initiative to learn and teach themselves and to learn from other people. Like I said, we've got a large family and I learned stuff from my brother, who works with me in another business. And, just really, he actually works with DigiBuild doing some stuff, but just being able to learn from each other and encourage each other. And there's that whole saying that iron sharpens iron, right? So finding people that are going to push you and give you those ideas and help you and be honest with you. That's my family, that transparency. They're very honest, maybe to a default sometimes in the way they're approached to it, but just having that influence in your life allows you, when you get into a large company and get accepted into like a Procter & Gamble, there's going to be a lot of scrutiny. There's their process for hiring's hard, but then you get in and they only want to make you better because that's going to make the company better. And then it's going to show investing in people will show on your bottom line every day, all day, right? And so that's one of the things is investing in people. And that's what P&G did with me is they invested in me and they gave me feedback. But it's your willingness to accept that feedback and to be able to sit back and really assess, okay, is this really happening? Is this true for me, what they're saying? Because there's always something that you can learn from feedback. I mean, even the most critical person of you that, could say, well, you're, whatever that is that their topic is, you can learn from them and grow. And it's being able to receive that and understand yourself enough and being able to turn that around and utilize that to your advantage to grow from it, I think is key. And a lot of people, we were talking about earlier about fear, they're a fear of judgment, and I still deal with that. I mean, am I afraid that, I'm not going to be part of this group or they're not going to like me, or I'm getting on this podcast with Wendy and I'm going to have anything to say, Yeah. So our insecurities, our fears, they drive us. But when you can overcome that, and that's what I feel, my childhood brought me, and my aunts and people around me still influence me, is to challenge me in those areas. My best friend, my husband, John, he has been the biggest supporter and cheerleader and person who encourages me and comes alongside and actually helps me, with even just practical things. That lifelong partner has been critical to me to have that, because he accepts me for who I am, understands my background, my weaknesses, and yet he'll work with me on my strengths to focus on those. He doesn't focus on my weaknesses. And so I think those are critical things in your life, is to surround you with people that are going to help you and really to minimize the people in your life that are negative, right? Because it's so easy. We're already prone to be judgmental about ourselves and to consume what people say and fear that. So it's also, realizing there's a line to be drawn on what this person says about me. And so knowing yourself, your self-awareness is so critical to your success in life, right? Knowing who you are, what you believe, what are your core things, and how you allow people to give you feedback and how that comes across, in how you live.
Absolutely. And you shared with me too, April, and I really want my listeners to hear this, right? Because there's a lot of weight put on education and degrees, and tell the audience, like you kind of touched on that you were up against like Ivy League people in that room, right? But share with the audience, like your educational background, because I think that's where the grit comes in, and that open-mindedness to continual growth that has really served you. So I'd love for you to talk about that a bit.
Yeah. So my journey with Procter Gamble is when you get hired by them. So getting in is difficult, but it's also, I think it's being that lifelong learner. So I still went to college. I think I've got about 8 classes left before I finish my bachelor, but just being that lifelong learner. And it might take me a little bit longer to catch on to something, but, before we didn't have the internet, or it wasn't as accessible, or the information wasn't accessible, when I was in my 20s and 30s, right? Well, now it is. But back then you'd have to go find books and magazines. I mean, Harvard Business Review is like one of my most favorite, magazines out there, the Wall Street Journal, because I consumed and read a ton. So being a reader, they joked about it, readers are leaders. Well, they are, because you're putting into your mind consumes all that information. You might not understand it, but the way your brain functions is that when a challenge comes up or a situation where you're trying to overcome something or learn something that's very difficult, all that stuff that you put in your mind has consumed that, and it's in there, and it's working, together to help you come up with those conclusions or those things that you need to learn. Right. Absolutely. So I feel like, all that input, that good input that, that you're learning and reading books and magazines and talking to other people, I think is really critical, because it's not just this education isn't one and done. We have so many kids that go through, I say kids, children, I think of my nieces and my nephews, they go through college, but they don't learn they don't learn anything really. They learn basic core, if it's business you learn about business and you learn about those things, but the application of those is most important. So anybody can learn something. It's the application of those things. And I think applying yourself and giving yourself some grace to fail and to have some of those bad reviews, right?
Yeah.
I've been in on the side of, some bad reviews where like, man, you got to change this, or this is going to become a real issue. And then having that self-awareness and enough humility to say, yeah, I probably need to work on that a little bit, right? Yep, got that. And usually those things that our weaknesses are, they're going to be with us for life. So how do you overcome that, and how do you use your strengths to overcome that? So not focusing so much on you and the things that you need to work on as much as on your strengths to overcome those other areas.
Which is a great segue, right? Because I love that like having that open-mindedness. First of all, you said a whole bunch of great stuff that I want to make sure everybody kind of captured. Is one is like, it's really about knowing yourself. And we're going to talk about that, and leaning into your strengths, being open to feedback and open to receive it, because there is a learning in all types of feedback. Mm-hmm. And just having that really growth mindset and just having that hunger to learn and to grow, because you're right, it does not end when you finish school. Mm-hmm. And I think that can be a trap for people. And yeah, for sure. So want to make sure I make note of that. But you touched on something super important, and that is, and we've talked about it, is strength finders, which is really about knowing your strengths and leaning into them. Yes. And you talked about and touched on emotional intelligence, and that's partly self-awareness, right? So half of emotional intelligence is knowing self. So I know you're very passionate about this. And I think too, that this can really help people move from being stuck. So please share with the listeners more about that.
Yeah. So one of the things I did is I was building out teams for companies like Procter Gamble and Starbucks is I wanted to have a diverse team, not just a diverse team on our color authenticity, but also on what we brought to the table from a skill set. And my husband is an introvert, and early on, I learned that there was, I thought, well, he's not outgoing, and I got to pull it out of him. And let's go do this, with all these groups of people. Like, it was like, he was like, can we just have, a few people over, not a house full of people over, right? Because of our personalities. And what I learned from that, and what I've gleaned from him my entire life, is that there are so many areas where his strengths are that are my weaknesses, that I want to tap into that, right? And we're very complementary. Well, it's the same thing with a team of people. You want to have people from different walks of life. Yes. But you also want them with different skill sets. And I found that strength finders, individual strength finders, as well as strength finders for teams, really has it nailed, that you can spend your entire life beating yourself up, feeling like you're not going to be able to accomplish this. And, sometimes having pity parties, we all have that. We lick our wounds and, get back up and go back at it. But I think the key thing is not to focus on those things, so much. Yeah, make some changes, make sure you're aware of your weaknesses. Don't try to, if you have a weak point, don't try to make it a strength, right? Because you're going to spend your entire life trying to make that one little thing your strength, when you've got all these other areas where you're really good at. Focus on that. And that's where you're going to not only help yourself, but you're going to help the community and people around you, no matter what your role is in life, right? Whether if you're a mom, whether if you're being in for a nonprofit and you're helping out the community, whatever that is, take your strengths and focus on those, 90% of the time. And so when building out a team, I would follow that model, and we hit all kinds of records of success. The team that I had the most, it was the high performance work team, was that I utilized that mindset with my team and was highly successful at it. So and then people feel really good. People want to be part of something where they're feeling like they're contributing. They're all on board. They're using every skill they possibly can, and they're using their best skills. And I'm not beating them up every day about what they're not doing well, right? And so that's where I feel like that's very, very important. But then I think those, because people aren't so self-aware, I think those models help people understand who they are. I don't think I've had anyone ever take the strength finders or individual strength finders and look and read the stuff and say, oh, that's not me at all. Right. They're like, wow, they nailed it. Even on nuances and things, they've nailed it. So I think that helps people feel really good about where they're at. and that they can just build upon it. And that self-awareness comes from understanding that. So I don't care if it's, there's multiple personality things out there you can take, but I think those things really do help people come along and understand who they are and drive that awareness.
Absolutely. I mean, I shared with you, I'm a licensed insights discovery practitioner, and it's another psychometric tool, right? Just like Strengths Finders, just like Myers-Briggs, just like a lot of them out there. And I think you nailed it, right? Lean into your strengths, because when we do that, like we create this momentum, right? Mm-hmm. Because we're getting more joy out of what we do. When we know what we're good at and we can just like be really, well, first of all, you get praised for it because that's your superpower. But when we try to force something that is maybe a bit of a blind spot for us or a gap in our skill set, I mean, it's good for growth, but it's also can be a real demotivator, right? And it can get us stuck. And it's kind of like trying to shove that square peg into a round hole. And a lot of leaders sometimes make that mistake because they'll challenge people in areas that they know already that they're not great at, because they think that's going to help that person become more rounded. But we have to recognize that our strengths drive momentum, and we can still pull on those gaps or blind spots from time to time. But it can be very mentally and physically exhausting for us because it's not in our nature.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I even think about, like we were talking about, different personalities, right? Someone that's more of an introvert or not outgoing like me, right? They feel like, well, I can't be a leader. I don't have those skill sets. No, those things are learned, they're behaviors. And I've seen, the way Procter Gamble hires and the people that they look at, it isn't about how outgoing they are. It's about how they utilize the talents that they have and how they apply them. So anybody can be a leader in any type of role. I mean, you could be a mom and be a leader, right? I mean, I don't know what's more difficult than being at home and raising children in our next generation and being able to lead and lead well in those areas, if that's what you love to do, right? Being siblings. I remember, I have one older brother. I'm the oldest girl. And if you think you're not leading and influencing and helping your siblings along with life, you do that from a young age and don't even understand that. And then you begin to see your influence. And so I feel like, you learn those things. So anybody can be a leader.
Yeah. And it is true. Like not all leaders are extroverts. Quiet leadership is also needed in organizations as well.
Yeah.
Now, what they bring to the table is they're great listeners, right? And they're great, like sit back and assessors, whereas sometimes extroverts maybe aren't great at that, but that's okay. It's a gap. It's a blind spot that we might have. But as long as we recognize it, we can dial that up in ourselves too as leaders. That's right. I love that you touched on leadership shows up in different areas of our lives. We sometimes associate leadership specifically with corporate or in our entrepreneurial space, but it shows up as a parent. It shows up as a sibling. I would think that your negotiation skills had to be pretty strong in your family when you had to negotiate bathroom time.
Absolutely.
So, right. So, and that is a sign of leadership and influence, because sometimes it's fight or flight. You got to go.
Or a little bit of bribing helps.
That works too. That works too. Absolutely. So we kind of touched on emotional intelligence and self-awareness, and I know you're very passionate about that. Yeah. So speaking to women specifically, right, who are younger, coming up through what they want to identify as their path in their careers, what type of advice would you give them?
I would definitely say that, being aware of yourself is important. And why that's important is so that you're aware of what other dynamics are going on in the room around you, right? Being aware of, am I listening? Am I intently listening to this person? And do I understand what they're saying? And that could be about the business, what they're trying to teach you about the business, your role in what they're trying to say. These are the expectations, within this role. So really being tuned into how you are also being perceived within that room, right? And understanding, are the perceptions, am I understanding how they're perceiving me? And if they're not, how am I going to change that, right? So that my intent of what I'm trying to get across and communicated is received well, right? So I think you have to have intention to understand yourself, but also taking that to say, okay, I understand myself now, but do I understand how I'm being perceived and how am I communicating what I want people to understand and know about me, but also about my goals and how those goals fit into other people, because it's not about us. We have a generation of iPhones, everything, right? And so, you hear people talk about that, but everything is focused on us. And sometimes we don't want it even focused on us. It's the social media, it's everything that plays on it. So it really is connecting, being able to connect with other people in a very, in a deep way. And sometimes that connection takes a lot of humility, right? And I don't see a lot of that going on today, being able to step back and say, okay, I might have very diverse thoughts about this particular subject or this particular thing, but I need to work with this person and we want to succeed together. So what is that thin line? I don't care if it's the thinnest line in the world. What is it that I need to understand about this person that we can connect and communicate and work together to be successful? Because you're going to come across people you absolutely do not agree with. I don't care if it's politics or how they run the team or their opinion about how they run a team or their opinion about how people should be developed. There's all kinds of things that we just aren't going to agree upon. And that's okay. To be comfortable with not agreeing is okay. But what are the things that we do? What are those connections and touch points? Because if we want to be successful and we want to be great leaders, we have to have that ability to be able to do that. And I think it's taking self-awareness to the next point, which ties into your emotional intelligence, which usually I'm going to turn this podcast around a little bit here and ask you to kind of, bring those connections together on emotional intelligence and why. Those who have emotional intelligence, most of the top companies today, the leaders have lots of emotional intelligence and apply those principles.
Absolutely. And I think there's been a huge shift, especially in the last, say 5 to 10 years, right? Where emotional intelligence, especially at higher executive levels, is more important now than education IQ. And it is about there's a shift, right? About focus on people, because through your people, that's where you achieve your goals. Yeah. So with leadership specifically, and even early on in your career, like you touched on, it's knowing oneself is super important. It is 50% of the equation of emotional intelligence. So there's a lot of things that you have to consider. You have to consider biases, unconscious biases, right? You've got to consider the influence of the external world on you as well. And when you know yourself, it really allows you to recognize, and I kind of touched on this, you have to be very aware of your strengths, but you also have to be extremely aware of your blind spots. Mm-hmm. And there are tools out there. There's coaches, right? Executive coaches. There's tools. Any psychometric tool will help you with that. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that in a leadership role, as you evolve in your career and you kind of climb that ladder, it's even more important that you are more aware of how you connect with other people and how that relationship happens, because then it's now your job, because you're more self-aware, to figure out how you connect with that other person. Yeah. So
that's true leadership. That
is true leadership, because it's not about you. You are absolutely 100%. And when you can get a better understanding of yourself and then remove yourself of that situation and really focus on the outcome and focus on that other person, that's where the magic happens. That's where things start to shift in businesses. That's where you build culture. That's where you're able to achieve your goals much faster through your people, through those connections, because the higher you get up on that rung, the less you're involved in things. So you've got to learn more about yourself and how you can influence and persuade people within your organization. And it does start with your self-awareness. Sorry, super getting soapboxy there, but I get very passionate about this because I see so many leaders out there that forget that, especially when they're under stress. Because when we're under a stressful situation, we go to our default. Right. Yeah. We're going to, and sometimes it's not our best selves that show up. Mm-hmm. So I call it's how do you show up on your good day and how do you show up on your bad day? So when you're in that bad day, you got to have some sort of triggers built in. And that does take self-awareness to remind yourself, hey, this is not who I want to be. This is who I want to be, because it's not about me. It's about those other people that are looking to me to lead them. Yeah. And so, it shifts the whole paradigm, right? Because old leadership, that wasn't how they led. That's not how they led. It was about, let's get the outcome and we'll just work people to death to get there. Right. Yeah. And I think in some industries, it still exists for sure. There's still that sprint that sprint mentality, especially in the technology end of things. And I think that is required. But you also have to like take into account like people's lives because they have them, right?
Yes, yes.
And so it's kind of like it really is so important just to know yourself.
Build on that too. It's like those skill sets. If you can teach someone these things, then it's a lifelong thing. It's like, what's that whole saying, about you teach a man how to fish and he'll eat for life, right? Yeah. So I think that's part of it. And then I think the other piece that brings to the table is the humility aspect. And that humility aspect is 2 words. I'm sorry.
Yes. Yes. And thank you.
And people don't say that. I'm sorry. I really had a bad day yesterday. The way that I acted as a leader, it was not an example of that, or how I, said things to you that, were out of frustration, could have been better framed up, but just being authentic and not fake. And authenticity comes with showing humility. And I think that's critical. I mean, that's been the success of my teams. You could probably talk to anybody, and I'm sure they could name all my faults. But one thing they would say was that I absolutely cared about them. I gave them skills that they couldn't just use for this job, but for lifelong skills that they could take with them. So investing in people every day is really what matters. And an example of that is, so 2 things. One is in my career, when I switched jobs from Procter Gamble and went to work for Starbucks, 40% of my sales team followed me. They left their jobs and followed me to another place. And the CEO at DigiBuild used to work for me when I ran the Procter Gamble business. And years later, he came back and said, "Do you want to co-found a business?" So to me, that's just amazing, because it wasn't like I was easy on him whatsoever. In fact, he'll tell you stories of how I was pretty hard. Yeah. I had very high expectations, but I cared, and it came through. I was just trying to push and drive him in a direction that was going to help him lifelong. And it absolutely has. And now I get to benefit from being part of his life and being able to build a business with him, which is incredibly exciting.
Yeah. And that really is the other side of emotional intelligence, right? Is that connection with other people, because first it's yourself and it's others. Yeah. And I think too, with emotional intelligence, what that affords you is it affords you, like you said, humility. So when you know yourself, you know your strengths and you know your gaps or your blind spots, you're able to pick the right people to surround yourself with too, because you do not have to be the smartest person in the room. That takes a huge amount of humility to just say, hey, you know what? I'm going to hire that person. They're way smarter than me or more skilled in that area. And I think like, it's kind of like you let go of ego, and self-awareness allows you to do that. Oh, sorry. Tangent on like emotional intelligence. Super excited about that. Like I'm personally getting certified myself next month, and to add to my continuous learning mentality, right? We always want to grow and be better for the people that we serve. So that's one of the things too. And I think earlier too, we talked about something really interesting, because we talked about, women in leadership roles, but also like early career and self-awareness, and how that's really important for those young ladies to kind of, how do you find that? And one of the things you do is mentor young women in business. And I'd love for you to share that, why that's important. And from your experience, what are you seeing out there?
Yeah. So, my husband and I couldn't have children. So I've just really, I've filled that space and that void by mentoring young women as well as young men. My husband and I do a lot of mentoring together as well. But for me, it's when I see young ladies at risk, it's just coming alongside them. And first of all, getting to know them, right? Know who they are and really understand where they're coming from, and understanding some of their personal desires. And when people are younger, they really don't know what they have a clue of some things they like, but they don't know what they want, but still helping them, even if it's a dream you're thinking you're going to probably change your mind in 2-3 years from now on this, but just helping them even think through that particular dream that makes the most for them. And through that, help them learn about themselves, help them learn about, okay, if you really like to do this, well, what are those steps that you need to do to hit that goal? And it's taking basic principle, some soft skills about how do you manage your time today? What is that going to look like for the future? Just some very basic soft skills that people are not taught anymore. I mean, you go through high school and you don't learn those skills, right? And so how to manage your time, if you want to improve in a particular area, you have a particular passion for something, well, then what are you going to do to learn about? Well, go talk to people that are in that industry now. I've got a gal she wants to get into equestrian work, right? And so she's learning she wants to understand how to put hooves on horses and what does that mean? And what type of technology? I'm encouraging her. Well, look at what kind of technology out there that's more humane to put it on there, or how do you, just really getting her mind to think broader about a particular subject or a particular career that she's looking at, so that when she really does figure out her career, she'll be able to understand how to go find out more about that. She'll know the steps to be able in the process to go through to understand how to be very successful at that. So I think soft skills are incredibly important in the younger population. And I think they can start, my mom taught me those things, when I was younger. We had chores. We had, I was working since I was 5 years old, right? I remember shoveling snow with my brother and we got $5. Well, $5 when I was 5 years old was a lot of money, right?
And bought a lot of candy, I bet.
Well, yeah, I did. And I think the store owner got so frustrated because I just could not figure out what pieces of candy to buy because I never had money to buy candy. So it's like I was very choiceful, and had to really think through what it was in that candy display, what I was going to buy. But it's those skills that I think are most important when you're mentoring people is, drive their self-awareness, help them understand even their interactions. I always use the people that are around them, their teams of people, their community around them, to help them learn, how are you interacting with your siblings, or why are you frustrated with your mother or father, or, why did you decide to quit sports, or what is it? And, so it's using, who the relationships around them and helping them work through those relationships that will make them successful long-term.
Absolutely. So it really does come back to relationship building, communication, connection. And I think that's what highly successful people have in common is they know how to connect. They know a lot about themselves, right? And then they also take risks and have grit. Because you had mentioned there's a lot of grit, because I really do want you to talk a little bit about your business.
Yes.
And because I think it's super important, because I actually called you a unicorn when we first met, because you are a woman in the construction industry. But on top of that, you're digitizing things for the construction industry. So that's kind of like, where the rainbow is, but then you're the unicorn because you're a woman in that industry. So tell us a little bit about, DigiBuild and what you guys do.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about a company, because I have a lot of passion for it, obviously. So what we do is, so we started off 4 or 5 years ago. The vision was to create a platform, a digitized platform that did like project management and all this, the end-to-end, construction software, where that everything you did in construction was on software. Well, there's a company out there that's pretty much done a lot of that, which is called Procore and Autodesk, and they're amazing and they've led the way. Even though we could say they're competition, even back then when we were creating something similar, we don't look at it as competition, because this industry is so lacking in any type of digitization and support that we just feel that all tides rise together, right? And so it's important. I mean, at Procter Gamble, we wanted to be number one brand for diapers and shampoo, but how many shampoos and diapers are out there today, right? There's room for growth for everybody. So for us in this industry at this time, it's not competition. It's like, who can come alongside and we can all build this together, because we need to. So one of the things, back in October of 2019, we partnered with IBM. And the reason we partnered with them is because our software is built on blockchain. And blockchain is just a use case. It's not cryptocurrency like a lot of people think, but it is just a tool and a foundation for ensuring that information being communicated can be trusted and can be verified, right? So it's almost like a trust and verify platform to make sure that whatever is being brought through that platform is true and transparent. And so that's why we chose to work with IBM because they work on Hyperledger Fabric. So we had an innovation summit. They are connected with lots of construction companies. So we brought them all into San Francisco, and we had 2 days of just sitting down and saying, hey, what's next in the construction industry? What is it that we need to focus on to help drive this entire industry to a new level? And so the areas that we decided to focus on that came out of there was supply chain, number one thing that came out of there. And so that's when we started pivoting. That next January, we started pivoting and thinking about, okay, we've already been down this road and we've got a lot of this product working, but obviously, and it's needed, but there's people in this space right now. So we've got to pivot, and the risk and the consequences to do that are very significant. I went 2 years without taking a salary, right? Doing nothing. We did everything we could to get scrappy and to get funding from different companies. And we're privileged to say that we're part of the Y-Combinator, startup industry, which really, really helped us, really grow as leaders together, but also understand building a business from the ground up as a startup in this type of field. So really, it was about making tough decisions and knowing the consequences where there's going to be pain involved in that. And then for me personally, it was like when Rob said, hey, you want to come over and co-found this company? It was like, okay, wait a minute. It's software, which I am not a tech savvy person whatsoever. And it's construction, and it's, the area that I felt like I knew most about when we decided to pivot was supply chain management, because I worked at product supply and logistics and operations for Procter Gamble. So I knew that world and I understood it. So I felt like, woo, got one thing going for me. So it was a big thing. It was like, I knew I was going to have to, I knew right off the bat, I was going to make some very big mistakes. And they weren't only just big mistakes, they were going to be costly mistakes. So how do I mitigate that? And being comfortable knowing there's going to be a lot of risk and you're going to do that, and of course, Rob grew up in the construction industry. He had his own construction business. So he was very familiar. So we leaned on each other for those things. But what I brought to the table for Rob was that corporate experience, understanding how leaders think, how they get paid, what's the mindset within cultures. There's cultures within cultures, right? There's subcultures. So being able to read a room, understand, what these big corporate executives and the larger, C-suite people were saying and doing and what they were wanting. So taking what I did have and bringing it to table and applying those skills and understanding those things were pretty neutral across all businesses, right? And so that I felt like, okay, I have something here, but for sure, there's a lot I'm going to have to learn. And are all those skills directly applicable? Some were and some won't. And one example of that was I loved new business development. So at Procter Gamble, anytime someone gave me some new thing to go do, a new team to build out, same thing with Starbucks or this brokerage that I worked for. I think I, helped work with 4 or 5 different teams there, right? It was that drive to really connect with people and understand when you're building those out, what your skills are, but what you don't have. So new business development, I was all in for it, took all my stuff, would build it out. And I'm thinking, this is amazing. So when Rob says, hey, come build and co-found a startup company, I'm thinking, whew, easy peasy. I've done a ton of new business development.
Yeah. Not.
Because you have all those resources when you're working with other companies. You have no resources. You are it. You've got 16 hats and you've got to wear all of them, and you've got to be in the moment for each of those roles at that time and use those emotional intelligence and self-awareness to understand what each of those roles are playing and how you're communicating, how you're perceived you're communicating, and with what authority you're communicating all those different aspects of roles that you're doing.
Well, that's amazing, right? Because I think there's a lot of people, women, men out there who are like hedging. They're hedging on, okay, I want to do something in the entrepreneur space, but there's fear holding them back. And you didn't let that fear hold you back. So what advice, this is great parting advice, right? For the listeners, as not only a woman entrepreneur, a woman in a very successful business in an industry that's not typically associated with women, but what advice would you give those people that are on the fence, right? Of what they need to bring and some of the things that, like, I love you. You had this mental mindset. I know it's going to be hard. I know I'm going to make mistakes. So I don't want to take your thunder, but what advice would you give them?
I think that you're going to always have fear, and you're always going to always want to doubt yourself. And I think it's overcoming that and not listening to that fear, literally shutting out the fear and being okay with that. I'm not perfect. I'm never going to be perfect, and not allowing that fear to almost like paralyze you to where you can't move. And so it's overcoming that. It's like that runner training, train your mind and your heart not to listen to that fear. It's like this life's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And learning how to endure through those tough times and taking feedback and overcoming fear to project you forward is really the key to why I'm not stuck somewhere back, still working in retail and still in that industry that I loved, but really was ready for a change and decided to make that leap.
And I love that you said that you have to overcome that mental fear, and you use the word overcome perfection or perceived perfection and just plow through. It's like when you use that runner analogy, the first thing I visualized, I'm a highly visual person, is, every runner hits the wall. There's a moment in that marathon where you hit the wall, your body says, no way, but your mind has to overcome that. And that's the visual that I want to leave with the readers, right? Or the listeners, because everybody's going to hit the wall. And sometimes you can overcome it on your own. And sometimes you need a little bit of help. And that's where a mentor or a coach or someone like yourself who has that experience, find those people in your network with them and help and be really humble and ask for help.
That's it. Amen.
Yeah. Amen, sister. So with that being said, oh my gosh, this was such a wonderful sharing. April, I want to thank you for sharing your wisdom, your experience, your story, and being so vulnerable with the listeners today. I thank you from the bottom of my heart with like paying it forward. And I think that's the best thing and the best gift we can give to each other.
Thanks so much. Appreciate being here.
Thank you so much.